Hello. So, funny story, sort of. I did an entire reading and realized that it wasn't recording. So this is a take two of the reading, and hopefully that's going to make it better. Because I was able to pre-read and pre-comment, and so hopefully this will maybe be a richer episode. So, welcome. Left off last week with talking about the wrong views in Buddhism, in traditional Buddhism. And I'm reading On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path drawn from the Pāli Canon by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu. And again, I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing the name. And so, yeah, Buddha was talking about, wrong views. And again, recalling the reading and just appreciating, his practicality. This kind of, coming up the way that I did and having exposure to the things that I did and being the inherent skeptic and kind of secularist, kind of a natural secularist given my conditioning that I am, this really works, really well for me. This idea that, hey, don't like the word wrong? Don't like the word wrong? Is that a shenpa for you? Well, number one, right? Buddhism would suggest that maybe explore that shenpa, right? See how much of it is still controlling you. And then the other part is, can you look at it from this perspective? Why it's not a good idea to be racist. Generally speaking, no Homo sapien should be racist. Generally speaking, why it might not be a great idea to be an annihilist. So again, I don't want to dwell, but so we're going to pick it on up at the bottom now of page 125. And this is, we're now kind of getting into transcendent right view. MN 117, in defining transcendent right view, doesn't directly mention the Four Noble Truths, but it does mention the faculty and strength of discernment. This is Sutta 103, both of which are synonymous with the Four Noble Truths. In addition, transcendent right view also is expressed in the teaching called dependent co-arising, Paticcasamuppada, and again, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Remember, I'm not a scholar here, right? So the Paticcasamuppada, which works out the first three noble truths in great detail. This section will cover both teachings. The Four Noble Truths are the Buddha's second categorical teaching, i.e., a teaching true for all situations across the board. These truths take a problem-solving approach to the issue of suffering and treat it as a doctor might go about treating a disease. The first truth, the truth of suffering, corresponds to identifying the symptoms of the disease. The second truth, the origination of suffering, corresponds to identifying the causes of the symptoms. The third truth, the cessation of suffering, corresponds to the possibility that the disease can be cured, and the Four Noble Truth corresponds to the course of treatment that cures the disease by attacking its causes. So again, there's just this great kind of practicality to it. Once again, it almost kind of, resembles this idea of a map, a map that we can follow. Buddha loves those maps, right? It's useful to keep this analogy in mind, for it counters a popular misconception that in focusing on suffering, the Buddha was a pessimist. On the contrary, he adopted the confident attitude of a doctor who talks about a disease, not because he has a pessimistic view of the world, but because he knows how the disease can be cured. So this has come up quite a bit already, right, in previous sections of the book. And I found this really great video the other day, and I'll be sure to drop it in our book club channel if anybody's listening to this and following along my prattlings. And it's this very just a great, very accessible I found, to my view, kind of discussion that this monk was a teaching that he was offering his Sangha, his community, that kind of speaks to this very idea here. This idea that, in the West, we get a lot of things wrong, really, about Buddhism, and it's not our fault. It's been kind of, it's been, I'm going to use a strong word, but it's how I feel. I think it's been largely corrupted, for many, many decades of kind of human ego deciding that they should change it because they've got a better idea. Rather than a yes and, they made it a yes or, and they split off. And that's okay. That's okay. Just understand what the ramifications of those decisions are. That you change the message. Yeah, so just something to kind of keep in mind, So yeah, we have a lot of weird views about Buddhism here in the West, I think. And, I'm also a psychologist, so boy, oh boy, do we have some weird ideas about Buddhism and psychology. Wow, had some interesting conversations. I'll just leave it there. But there's this idea here, right? The first truth, the truth of suffering, corresponds to identifying the symptoms of a disease. So think about the word disease for a second. I mean, maybe you can call to mind some diseases that, you're familiar with. Maybe people in your family have them. Maybe you have them, diabetes. We have this idea, right? We have this idea of what a disease is, right? So if somebody's diabetic, I realize there are those that would shame them, So maybe diabetes is a tricky example here to use, but I'm just going to use it anyway, I'll just, maybe for those who, because, right, we will always argue for our case, right? Because we need to be right, myself included. I'm also a Homo sapien. I also do this all the time, right? So it's not like I'm above it all. I'm not. Nobody is. Nobody's above it all. If you were above it all, to a Buddhist view, you wouldn't be here. And if you think you're above it all, you have a lot of work to do. A lot, I would argue. But yeah, we don't shame, right? We don't shame someone who was born with a disease or has a disease, right? There's this practical aspect to it, right? That can I look at this from the perspective of the doctor, of the observer, right? Notice that when you can view it from that perspective, that you can remove that, thereby that kind of removes any egoic identification with the self, which is exactly what we're kind of trying to do in Buddhism. I don't like the word try, but that is what we're shooting for, right? I'm going way off the rails already. I just started. I'm just going to keep on reading. He wasn't a pessimist, right? We've already established this. Again, common misconception, this kind of misunderstanding of what the suttas actually say. In moving from mundane right view to transcendent right view, the Buddha narrows the focus of the teaching from action in general to the actions that cause and end suffering, and also changes the mode in which the view is expressed. Mundane right view talks about people and worlds. Transcendent right view about actions, primarily actions of the mind, without reference to people and worlds. To continue the analogy of right view as a map, mundane right view is like a map showing political boundaries. Transcendent right view is like a map of underlying geological features with the political boundaries removed. The reason for this change in the mode of expression will become clear when we discuss his definition for the origination of suffering. Because one of the causes for suffering lies in being attached to concepts of selves, me, my, I, me, mine, myself, my ego, my truth, my authentic truth, me, my, right? Yeah, we're not into that in Buddhism. It's not really how we roll. Not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's not Buddhist. Yeah, you don't have to like it. I'm just the messenger, right? So the reason for this change in the mode of expression will become clear when we discuss his definition for the origination of suffering, right? Because one of the causes for suffering lies in being attached to concepts. They are nothing more than concepts. How do I know? Because I've meditated so much and for so long that I've blown my own mind. And I've had some other experiences as well when I was younger that I don't need to share here that have confirmed, my practice now has confirmed what I saw through different means and methods then. It's a conception. We're participating in it. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Although those concepts are necessary on the mundane level of right view, to explain to listeners attached to those concepts why the path to the end of suffering is worth their while, the actual ending of suffering requires thinking in a way that steps out of those concepts to view them from another perspective. And this is so salient here. I have seen and watched many, 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 many discussions in the Meditation Mind Discord server. And I think that if I was to, kind of look at them from a qualitative researcher perspective, kind of like looking for themes in the narrative, right? Themes in the narrative, coding and looking for themes. I'd say they kind of swing and hinge and kind of, they're working with these ideas that are found right here. How does one step out of human constructed concepts to be able to view them from another perspective? I study virtual reality. That's something that's what my dissertation's in. And, I'm very new to the sphere. I've only been studying it for a couple of years. And I actually don't like to be in VR myself. It makes me pretty sick. But, I continue to study it from an outsider's perspective because, I have mixed feelings about it as I have mixed feelings with tech in general. I don't think that tech is necessarily progress. I'm not one of those tech optimists. I consider myself a tech realist. But I think that VR, there's so many studies and there's so much good research out there about what VR is doing for a lot of human ailments right now that, quite frankly, from my view, would be better served explored through direct meditation. But I also understand that, especially nowadays, and, we're learning that we're changing the brain because of the exposure to information all the time, that younger generations, they're their brains are different than mine, for instance. I'm 53 and don't even use my phone in that way, right? So, and didn't come up with the phone, right? So, and again, you don't have to take my word for it. Just go out and go onto Google Scholar, do your own research. You can find out for yourself. But, VR is just this really wonderful technology that for many, many, many people, who don't get sick in it, it really does. When you talk to them about it, and you'll hear them use terms like overview effect, that thing that happens to astronauts, when they get out of the Earth's atmosphere and they can look out at Earth and they kind of have, that sense of awe, that thing that happens. Well, in Buddhism, we have other names for it, but, it's everything that Buddhism is, really, that kind of appreciation, that lived sense, that absolutely. So what you're experiencing in that moment right there is this. What you're experiencing in that moment is this, the actual ending of suffering. That's what you're experiencing. You're experiencing the actual ending of suffering. And the reason why you're experiencing it, that sense of awe, the reason why you're experiencing that end of suffering right there is because you're thinking in a way that steps out of your usual construct, your usual mental framework that has been created vis-a-vis your childhood, your upbringing. In Buddhism, it would say maybe past karma. And if you're a secular Buddhist, then fine, keep it here, right? It's how you came up, how you were conditioned by your parents, and your socialization and the family dynamics and how you learned how to communicate and get your needs met. All of that in Buddhism is called the fabricated mind, the fabricated condition, right? So you hear a lot of people in VR, talking about, we can use VR to actually help create a sense of empathy. Well, the jury's still out on that. You can look at the research, and there's a lot of good research that shows that it can. And there's also research that shows that there's not necessarily a connection, it's not all, it's not black or white, right? We're not all the same. I can't even be in VR, right? And that number is growing, by the way. So it's not that, but just because there are people that exist that can't do VR doesn't mean that you just throw VR out right? But it also means that you have to be able to talk about the things that aren't working. Because if you can't talk about the things that aren't working, well, the people that see the things that aren't working, they see you and they see that you're full of shit. And now they don't really trust you anymore. And they may not have any respect for you anymore. Because now they're thinking, are they deliberately trying to convince me of something I know to be false? Or do they not know? Right? And so it can become very sticky. And we already talked about this earlier, right? When Buddha was teaching his son. Why do we practice these things? Because you may not know your behavior and how it's impacting others, but others see you. They hear you, right? And that's going to be happening more and more and more. The actual ending of suffering requires thinking in a way that steps out of those concepts to view them from another perspective. I think tech can really help us maybe get access to some of this. And that's really exciting. I think that's really exciting. For me, before I move on, because now I'm just getting way off target, for me, my aim, my goal as a media psychologist and as, a Buddhist, and I'm pretty devout, man. So I didn't have kids. That's pretty devout. I feel like my role, this juncture in my life, is I'm going to use things like virtual reality that can kind of help with this phenomenon right here, this idea of helping people to step out of their concepts to view things from another perspective. And that's great. State change is great, but I'm really interested in trait change, which Buddhists believe can happen through disciplined effort, so. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to move on. The first noble truth. So we're going to get into those truths. Right? That perspective shift. Contrary to popular belief, the Buddha did not teach that life is suffering. Instead, as we pointed out in chapter 1, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering/stress, starts with a list of instances of suffering. And then identifies the factor that they all have in common, the 5 clinging aggregates. So the aggregates have come up before, they've come up before. And if you're listening to this and you're in the Meditation Mind server, just type them in to the search, because I'm sure you're just gonna find an absurd amount of information about the aggregates, because they're really, really key to really all of this working. To my view, and I'm speaking from my perspective, not as this I'm just a regular guy, okay? I'm just a regular dude, and I practice Buddhism, okay? Buddhism is it's a practice. That's what it is, okay? So the first noble truth, again, going back to how it's been misunderstood in the West, unfortunately, So I think a lot of people dismiss Buddhism out of hand as a result, right? They've got these kind of goofy ideas that are not grounded in reality about what Buddhism is. And so here it says, contrary to popular belief, the Buddha did not teach that life is suffering. So the aggregates. So yes, I would definitely recommend, if you are listening to this, and other people, or maybe, whatever, if you're listening to my voice right now, and you don't think I sound nuts or Buddhism sounds nuts, then I would really encourage you to go check out and more about the 5 aggregates. And also, I'll just reiterate right here, right now, that to my personal view, I would get a teacher. And Buddha says the same, Buddha says the same, because even though we can practice, we're still stuck in me, my, I, me, my, mine, I, me, mine, I, my awakening, my truth, my authentic self. See, a teacher can call you to task. Teacher can call you to account for that. And if you're serious about your practice, then you would want that. If you were serious about your practice, then you would want that criticism, because it's compassionate criticism. It's coming from a place of, well, if the teacher is worth their salt, it's coming from a place of genuine care. They want you to drop the crap. They want you to drop the ego. Drop it. That's fake. That's not real. Why are you hanging on to it? And contrary to another popular belief, the Buddha never stated that these aggregates constitute what a person is. He simply noted that, when clung to, they provide the basis for how a person defines him or herself. Notice the distinction there. Notice the difference. You know, to my mind, I don't like the word the devil is in the details. I'm going to change. I'm just for my use right now, I'm just going to say that what matters here is in the details. You know, it really does matter what's in the details. This is why I actually think it's so important to be able to read. Because if you can't read, then you're relying on other people to tell you what's on the page. And that's all coming through their own convoluted sense of self. You know, right now, you know, the idea of implicit bias is becoming very, very familiar in Western culture. We all have it. Even social justice activists have implicit bias. I felt it coming off of people when I lived in the South. I have it too. We all have it. Some of it is smart. Some of it has kept me alive. That's just the truth. But to act like we don't have it, well, from a Buddhist view, again, if you don't have it, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be living here. You would have transcended. You would be enlightened. You would be awake. Or maybe you're a bodhisattva, right? Maybe you're... I've never met anybody. I've never met an actual, you know, like, I'm not a scholar here, but I've never met anybody in my entire life who's completely free of ego. I'm full of ego. Are you kidding me? Just this morning, I had to arm wrestle my own mind and like write about it and journal and post and do all kinds of stupid crap just to be able to kind of like bring my practice to my own egoic mind and needing to be right, needing to have a voice in a situation. Noticing what I was doing and being like, really, Sarah, you need to be right here? Why? Why do you need to be right? If this doesn't feel like a good fit or match, leave. It's like, why do you need to make yourself, your own life miserable and everybody else's life miserable just so that you can be right? And so I immediately, I posted about this actually, did a little blog post. And with the help of Robot, I know some of you will not appreciate that. That's okay. I'm loving Robot for this. Lean in, man. Just because you don't like AI doesn't mean it's going to stop being around. Time marches on. Adapt. But at any rate, okay, once again, I'm drifting way off, but let me get back to it here. It's how we relate to those fabricated states, those aggregates that are what kind of comprises our egoic conditioning, the aggregates. It's how we relate to all of that that creates our suffering. It's how we relate to all of that that creates our suffering, right? And so that's actually very exciting. It's the opposite, I think, of what a lot of Westerners think about what Buddhism is. It's saying, hey, first of all, stop acting like life isn't suffering because you're lying to yourself. And deep down, you know that I'm right. You're going to die. Just because you're not wanting to acknowledge it or look at it or deal with it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Just because you don't like AI doesn't mean that AI isn't going to kick your ass, just like it's going to kick my ass. Whatever that means. It could be good, could be bad, could be both. It's inevitable. Why? Because it's happening. That's why. That's why. Because it's happening in front of your face, right? Life is suffering. That's all that means. Look, people get sick. People die. People get their heart broken. People get addicted. People's children get cancer when they're 2. People get violated, assaulted, pillaged, destroyed, genocided. Life is suffering, and Pollyannying around it isn't helpful. And in Buddhism, it is not wise. It is unwise. It is unwise. But the good news is that there's something that we can do about it, right? Because what Buddha said isn't life is suffering, it's how we deal with life that creates our suffering. That is a huge difference. Huge. Enormous. And it's exciting, you know. It means that through our own effort and hopefully, you know, again, those supplementary factors, man. Admirable friendship, you know, another voice, a wise voice, right? Not just any voice. I mention this all the time, right? That I am not a particularly likable person. So what do I mean by that? I mean that I am not a people pleaser by nature. You know, I'm kind of a straight shooter, very direct. and my patience isn't great. These are areas within my own practice. In fact, I just posted this in the server. These are areas of my own practice that I need to constantly be working on. It's just this, Sarah, it's not personal. It's not about you. People aren't actively, and even if they are, so what? That's their crap, not mine, right? So I have to constantly be working with my own, my own stuff, right? My own luggage, my own baggage. And it's one of the reasons why I became an embodiment coach. And, it's, even though I've had decades of therapy, and I've been meditating for well over 2 decades now, and I've done a lot of quote unquote work on myself. At my age and at this point, I don't even know what that means anymore, right? But I've definitely put the time in, and at the end of the day, and I would say now more than ever, discernment is critical for you, for all of you. There's this real emphasis of we need to do everything in community. That is a very egalitarian view, and I think it's a lovely view. I grew up on a hippie commune, and that was very much the view. That view also led to my abuse. Right? Everybody's welcome here. Even you, pedophilic drug addict. Even you're also welcome here. Yay! Big love, everybody! Yay! No. Discernment, right? So it's a lot of paradoxes in Buddhism, right? This idea that, you should be able to, bring in the practice no matter what's going on with you. Yeah, absolutely, right? We've already talked about this. And Buddhism is all about ethics. It's all about ethics. Anybody who tries to tell you that Buddhism isn't all about ethics is either knowingly or unknowingly lying to you. So do the work, and then you'll get the benefits. Yeah, Buddhism. Okay, so I'm going to get on back to it. So Buddha, he also admitted, getting back to the book here, he also admitted that the aggregates do provide pleasure. That's why people become infatuated with them and cling to them. But that to put an end to suffering, it's necessary to end the infatuation, which is why right view has to focus on the way in which the suffering that comes from clinging to the aggregates more than outweighs the pleasures they offer. And I've already been talking a lot, so I won't comment on that. But there's a lot to be had there, and I'm just going to move on. Okay, the second noble truth: the origination of suffering, stress, lies in 3 types of craving: craving for sensuality, craving for becoming, and craving for non-becoming. Ooh, this is juicy. Which are accompanied by passion and delight, and all of which lead to further becoming. Here again, there's a popular misconception that the Buddha identified all desire as the origination of suffering, but that's not true. Some forms of desire actually function as essential parts of the factor of right effort and the Noble Eightfold Path. And yeah, again, I'll try my best. I know it's not natural for me, but I'll try my best to keep this short. My bulimia, which really very, very nearly on a couple of occasions led to my suicide. They were not real committed. Obviously, I'm talking to you. Suicide attempts, but they were attempts when I was much younger. And so that addiction that I had to food, right? I don't want to say I have an addiction to food, and I eat a very particular diet to manage my addiction to food. And you don't have to believe that food's addictive. Yeah, we've already kind of established, who I take my marching orders from. But bulimia, right? So started when I was 10. You ever want to find out what real bulimia looks like? It'll blow your mind, and there's nothing sexy about it. And I think it freaks most people out, and that's because, most people don't want to look at their psychological gestalt, but we really need to start looking at it. But that, that addiction and and kind of the root cause of that addiction that stayed with me, that the bulimic behavior, I continued my bulimic behavior all the way up into my 40s, so that's a pretty severe addiction, right? Pretty severe patterning, right? That I used a lot of different tools to help me with. And, today I no longer, and haven't for a very long time, I no longer engage in that behavior. And I don't want to make this be about that, because this isn't a podcast about eating disorders. But where I'm going with this is, that was my entry point. A lot of people quote this lyric from Leonard Cohen, and I think it's just because it's such a beautiful, awesome lyric that really does get to the heart of the matter. The crack, the crack in our own facade about who we think we are. I, me, my, I. The crack is where the light gets in. That's the lyric. But that is how it happens. Your ego does have to crack, man. You just have to kind of deal with that, And if you can't or don't want to, don't shame yourself for it, Then you're just not there right now. And then maybe what I would say is, if you really want to be there and you're not there right now, well, what can you do in your own practice that will help you move you in that direction? You always have agency. I realize that not everybody believes that, but I'm Buddhist. I believe that. And I've seen it for myself. So doesn't matter what you think, where I'm concerned. You know what matters, what I think, where I'm concerned? What I think matters, where I'm concerned. You know what matters where you're concerned in terms of how you do your life, as long as it's mindful? What you think, right? So again, going back to this idea that we don't outsource this to other people. We don't tell them what we don't look to other people to tell us what we need to do, right? We do that on the mat. We do that with the voices that are admirable, and they're aligned. And that's it. All right. So I am going to keep it moving. The Pali word for craving, tanha, and I'm sorry if I got that wrong, also means thirst, a double meaning paralleling the double meaning of upadana, noted above, as both clinging and feeding. There's that word again, right? Clinging and feeding. This choice of words underlines the connection between the mind's felt need to cling and feed, and the suffering that the felt need creates. The three types of craving or thirst can be explained as follows. Sensuality, kama. Here carries the same meaning that it has under the graduated discourse. The mind's fascination with planning and fantasizing about pleasures of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. And that's from Sutta 147. Going back to the aggregates, right? The aggregates of form in psychology, maybe just the senses, the sense gates, right? Sight, smell, sound, haptics or sensory, touch, taste, right? So these sensual pleasures, and we go looking for them, right? Ooh, more clinging, more. I want more of that, right? More. Sometimes I like to play with the people that come to my VR meditations, where they'll say, oh, I was in VR for like 4 hours today. Well, are you sure that you're using VR mindfully? What are you avoiding? Why are you titillating your sense gates for 4 hours a day? What are you avoiding? What are you avoiding? What would happen if you put your VR headset down and you put your phone down and you went outside and you sat in the grass and just sat there, no matter what came up? You might break. Uh-oh. What are you breaking exactly? Now, again, I realize that this is why some people say Buddhism is dangerous. And I think what they mean by that, it's not that Buddhism is dangerous. It's that the practice of Buddhism, because, it's very contingent upon two things, ethics and practice, the practice of meditation. Every day, the practice of meditation, right? Well, that's what I do it every day. And then I go on retreats, right, too, on the regular, so that I can really break my mind. Remind myself of who I am, which is no one. So anyway, I'm going off the rails again. Let me get back to it. But that clinging, right? That's a trap, because what happens is, if we can't just be and sit with whatever arises, we have to go grab our phone, grab our VR headset, grab the TV remote control, grab our friends so that we can all be in community working on it together. I'm sorry, I realize this is going to put people off, but that's another distraction from what you're feeling. Stop distracting yourself from your feelings. with other people, tech, food, porn, drugs, drink. It's hard though, isn't it? It's hard. But we can practice. We can surround ourselves with admirable friends. And we can have intention. We can do our best through the help of admirable friendship to not bullshit ourselves about our own behaviors, and we can do the work. Yeah. And then what I find, and again, I'm over 25 years in here, is that just that kind of commitment, well, that naturally creates self-compassion. Someone in the Discord server asked that question the other day, and it was just like, oh man, boy, do I feel you. They had put in the Q&A forum something like, does anybody have any resources that they can share with me about generating self-compassion? And the word heartbreak, just right now, for whatever reason in this context, heartbreaking just sounds really trite. I'm just going to say, look, I am so familiar with what I am maybe imagining this poster is feeling. I spent so much of my life hating myself, just hating myself, And I don't want to get too much into that because then I'll get emotional. And as I've said before, I won't be useful for you. But I cry a lot. I think crying is very healthy. But you can let it come up, you can let it come up and just feel it. Nobody can feel stuff for us. You might be able to open the door in community. I've definitely been able to open a door in community. When I go to long retreats, even though we can't talk or even make eye contact, you may not know that about those Goenka retreats. But not only do you not speak for 11 days, you don't even make eye contact for 11 days. But you're surrounded by people. You can feel them walking by you, sitting next to you in the cafeteria, stinking up the meditation hall with their farts from all the vegetarian food. We're so together and unmasked, because you can't hold in a fart for 9 hours. What are you gonna do, man? You're stuck in a room with 9 hours eating vegetarian beans. You're gonna fart. Right? But that's the level of intimacy, right? But you're not looking at anyone and you're not speaking to anyone. Well, that's the nature of Buddhism. You see? You see? And it's so funny when you would, every day, right? Every day at the retreat, you could opt in. So you'd have you'd eat twice a day. That's another thing that really blows people's minds. And that really messed me up. And I had a pretty bad relapse actually after my first retreat like that because of my disordered eating background, which even though I had, I thought I'd had it, quote unquote, under control. The folly of man. Being kind of eating things that actually trigger my behavior, and not eating after noon and basically fasting, from noon on until you get up in the morning. At that point in my life, well, and even now I can't eat a diet like that now. It just wrecks me. But it was very, very challenging for me. But you're all in it together. You're all there, farting, sweating, suffering through the fire of your mind. You're hungry. You have all kinds of ideas about that. In my case, with a disordered eating background, it brought up the deepest, darkest demons that I have grappled with, right? Because we're working with my primary, kind of addiction here, which is an addiction to food. And so it was kicking it all up and all in, and there were times where I really thought that, there was one day where I spent pretty much my entire meditation day just plotting my escape. Where's my car parked? Okay, where is my car in relationship to the place where I'm sleeping? But I didn't. And I didn't because, because I've been practicing Buddhism for a long time, right? So I kind of knew what it was. I knew what was happening. I knew that what was going on wasn't real. It was just, it was just fabricated mind. So anyway, once again, I digress. I'm going to keep on moving here. Let me do that. But, that's really why it's recommended, in Buddhism that we do things like that every once in a while. And I'll be, hopefully, if I can get in, because there's waiting lists, but I'll be able to go to another one of those soon. before I moved to a state where there isn't one nearby. And I think it's really because of this idea here of, karma, that it can be really, really hard to really kind of develop right view because of this idea of sensuality and the ways that we cling. And also that we, kind of avoid different kind of sensual titillations, right? And they can be very much a siren song, right? And I think that we can all recognize how much sensual pleasure can be a siren song. Talked about this before, right? If you don't understand what I'm saying, then you need to go visit a place where you have a lot of unhoused people who are strung out on meth. And then maybe you'll understand how we can find sensual pleasure really quite titillating, quite desirable, right? And we could say to ourselves, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. I'm not dependent on meth. I bet you're dependent on your phone. How do I know? I've watched you guys. I think it's weird. Sometimes I just go out, I'm like, what is happening? Because I don't use my phone. I don't even bring my phone out when I go out, and I just look around. Everybody, it's a sea of people with their heads down, standing right next to each other, not talking with their head. What? Huh? What? Yeah, you're addicted. So, sensual pleasure, right? Can you notice these things? Can you notice them? So the second one, right? The second type of craving or thirst that Buddha described in the Pāli Canon is the idea of becoming. What exactly are what are you becoming exactly? You aren't anything. There's nothing to become because there is nothing. There's no ground. The idea of becoming suggests that you believe there's a ground. In Buddhism, there is no ground. There is no ground. One could argue with the idea of that, but they can't argue with the idea that there is no ground in Buddhism, right? They can maybe practice something else, but they can't deny what Buddha said. There is no ground. So what do you think you're becoming exactly? What are you becoming? What? Right? So that's kind of what's being played with here. Becoming. Bhava is a word that the suttas never define. The closest they come to a definition is to say that becoming occurs on 3 levels. The level of sensuality, the level of form, and the level of formlessness. And that each of these levels is based on a corresponding desire for sensual pleasures, for the pleasures of form, such as the pleasures of the mind in the 4 jhanas, and for the pleasures of formlessness, like the pleasures of the mind in levels of concentration based on formless objects, such as the perception of infinite space or infinite consciousness. And this comes from Sutta 365. And what this reminds me of is, again, another thing I love about Meditation Minds Discord server. I don't really do the Reddit thing, so I don't really know anything about Meditation Minds Reddit presence, which I think came first, but I am very active in the Discord server, and there's always really good conversations here, because you have a lot of people that study Hinduism in there. Right? You have people from all kinds of faith traditions, or just atheist, right? People who are atheist, but who are looking to using tools that kind of come from these traditions to kind of help with alleviating anxiety, depression, chronic pain, et cetera, right? As these practices continue to permeate Western psychology, as they have for many, many decades now, for about 100 years. William James, thank you, dude, and others like him. Anyway. Yeah, so this idea of becoming, right? And so, yeah, sometimes, you'll see conversations in the server. And again, there's no judgment here. Again, my aim here is to speak about, to comment on this book, and to kind of talk about, what do Buddhists do? And what's the Buddhist view of ideas, right? So everybody's got different ideas about things. What is the Buddhist view? Now, again, they're saying, hey, we don't really know exactly what Buddha meant by, becoming, right? It wasn't really clear. But, Bhikkhu goes on to say, and this is kind of what I suspect is happening too, because I remember going through it myself. And I also noticed that there are people on the Discord server who talk about it a lot. And so I know that it not only was it something that I experienced, But it's also something that others experience because they talk about it, right, frequently on there. And it's this fascination, right, with getting access to the jhanas, right? It's this fascination with getting access to the jhanas. And again, kind of going back and looking at, when you start getting into, right concentration, right effort, right mindfulness, and really what you're talking about there, when you start to tease those out, which of course we will, because we're really kind of digging deep here into the Eightfold Path, and those are 3 of the rights. So there will be chapters devoted to each of those. But I think that, when you start kind of getting into, again, remember Buddhism is a practice, and you say, I'm going to take up Buddhism, and you decide that you're going to call yourself a Buddhist. And so to my view, if you're going to call yourself a Buddhist, then you actually practice, because Buddhism is not about talking, it's about practice. And so you start to practice, right? And then as you practice, as you practice, discipline, effort, practice, right? As you do this, then you'll get into the jhanas for sure, definitely, And then you can kind of start to see for yourself. But what can happen, and this definitely happened for me in early days, when I first kind of started to have jhanic experiences, I did what the Buddha said we do right here. Cling. I want more of those. I want more of that. And really, and again, this is not a judgment. I'm just saying that what Buddha would suggest and what resonates for me, what I found to be true for me with my relationship with me, is that desire within me was doing nothing more than feeding my ego. Where am I trying to go? What's wrong with here, dude? Hey, Sarah, what's wrong with here? Why can't you just be here? Why do you need to, oh yeah, man, I got to the 3rd jhana. Yeah, me too, dude. That's awesome. Hey, tomorrow I'm going to try to get to the 4th jhana. Righteous. What's the point? No, really, I want to challenge you here. I'm asking you to ask yourself, what are you feeding? So, there's that edge of Buddhism again. And me, I'm a school teacher. I was a school teacher. I don't know how I feel about doing that again, but it's kind of the kind of teacher I was too, but I can't really help it. It comes from my Buddhism. There is an edge. There's this kind of like, I want you to see this, because until you see this for yourself, that it's true, because it's true for all Homo sapiens, then you'll see that you can go a little bit deeper here. You can see that you don't have to have everything hanging on and riding on outside conditions being right. And isn't that what real freedom looks like? Anyway, I'm going to keep on going here. But even though the suttas do not define the term becoming, the way they discuss it in various contexts shows that it means the process of taking on an identity in a particular world of experience. This process can happen both on the large scale level, when the process of consciousness moves to a new world and new identity at the death of the body, and the small scale level, when a thought world appears in the mind and you inhabit that world in your imagination. Yeah, so listen to kind of the quality of what's being said here. And as you practice, right, you're probably not even going to have access to any of this until you've been meditating for a while. Okay, because all of this is happening in Buddhism, it's subtle. You'll hear that word a lot. It's subtle. But as you continue to practice and you kind of get into these kind of more subtle kind of awareness of the machinations, right? The idea, the thoughts that are popping up in your mind. And as you kind of start to notice them, and then return your attention to the breath. And again, I'm not going to get into how to meditate in here. That is such a tired conversation. Just meditate. Stop talking about it. Just do it, okay? And then when you do it, you'll start to kind of see this going on, right? You'll kind of start to notice this. Like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Who's asking that question? Who? The who is referring to an I that Buddhism doesn't even exist. So you're clinging to something that's not real here, right? That's a dangerous game to play because it's an illusion. Okay, so I'm going to keep on reading. On both the large and the small scale, the world of experience and the identity you assume within that world grow out of a specific desire In a very real sense, this desire forms the nucleus that locates both that particular world and your place in the world. This is why in the definition of the second noble truth, the cravings that lead to becoming are said to relish, now here, now there. In focusing on a particular there, the mind establishes a location for itself, both in its imagination in this lifetime and in another world after death. Small-scale becomings influence both scales. They begin to move out of your imagination into the larger world, where you fasten on a desire to the point of acting on it. Say that you have a desire for pizza. Your world then becomes defined by the desire, consisting of anything that either helps you obtain the pizza or gets in the way. Anything or anyone irrelevant to the desire falls into the background of your world at that time. So again, this is some deep, deep psychology here, right? And, you know, I heard someone, I think his name is Judd Brewer, and I haven't listened to a lot of his stuff, but I have listened to some, and I really appreciate the work that he does, and value the work that he does. And what did he say recently that really stuck with me? It was, he was saying that Buddha was, in his view, he's, I think he's also a psychologist, right? But I think he said that Buddha was like super scientist. I loved that. I'm like, oh my, yeah. Buddha the super scientist. But yeah, right, this passage right here, this is some heavy duty psychology right here. Really heavy duty psychology. So we may not like to hear this, you know, but I think if you start to meditate, take it really seriously. And what do I mean by seriously? Again, this is my opinion. What do I mean by seriously? Meditate every single day for a minimum of 15 to 30 minutes, no matter what, and do that for at least 5 years. And I think if you can get to that mark, then you will really start to see some of the radical truisms here in Buddha the psychologist and what he's talking about here. This idea that, let's go back, okay? You fasten onto a desire. I want something. Here he's talking about pizza. Talk about a good analogy for me, right? I love pizza, but no, my thing was usually sugar, right? So I'll use myself back when I was in my binge and purging days, back in their worst. When I was emotionally triggered, and because I was so conditioned to use food to meet my emotional needs, when I was emotionally triggered, I had no gap between what triggered me and my response, because that's what conditioning is, right? Go look up what the word conditioning means. It's a psychological term. All humans are conditioned. We're conditioned to do something. We all are. All animals, humans are animals. All we can be conditioned. So when I wanted to provide immediate relief from what I was feeling, aversion, and I wanted that cake to relieve it, it would have it wouldn't have been like fast moving trains that could have kept me from getting access to an entire sheet cake if I wanted it, to check myself out so I didn't have to feel what I was feeling, right? So that's the psychology that we're talking about here. Now you might be listening to this and going, well, I've never been addicted to anything like that, so I don't really know what you're talking about. Fine, great. Then how about you give your phone to someone, tell them to hide it, and that they're not allowed to give it back to you for a week, no matter what, and that you're not allowed to use your phone at all. Tell everybody in your life that you broke your phone and that you just, whatever, I'm sure, lie, whatever you need to do. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say something that a Buddhist would never say, lie, whatever. Don't let yourself off the hook. Don't give yourself an out, and do it. Just don't be on your phone for a whole week. And now tell me that you don't have this experience. Now tell me that you don't have a psychological experience like this. If you can do it, great. Right on. That's great. You know? But if you can't do it, don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge that you're not super extra special. You're just like the rest of us Homo sapiens, right? And this is called Buddhist psychology. And he's giving, you don't have to pick it, But, if you do pick Buddhism as a psychology, or if you do pick Buddhism as a path, this is what he's talking about. He's saying, hey, this is kind of what I've come to see through my practice about my own mind, and what about mind. And me and students that I've worked with, what we found is that, we can actually work with these ideas. As for your identity in this world, it has two sides. The you who will find pleasure in feeding on the pizza, this is yourself as a consumer. And the you who either has the abilities to obtain the pizza or not, yourself as producer. Ooh, I like that. I've never kind of heard this kind of way of framing it before. When you abandon the desire for pizza, either because you've obtained it and eaten it, you've given up on trying to get it, or you've simply lost interest in it, you usually find yourself moving on to a different desire. You're not even aware of this. This is happening all below your conscious awareness. So you're moving on to a different desire around which you develop a different sense of the world and a different sense of who you are. A new becoming. Hear that. Hear that. A new becoming. As soon as what you want changes to another object, you're now new. You've now become something else. This is where I think that the law of attraction probably was, in some weird, random, totally washed way, had access to Eastern philosophy back in the early days. And there's a lot of people a little bit before the Edwardian period, like Mary Baker Eddy, or you look at the science of mind, that they clearly, I think Helena Blavatsky or whatever, they were very, very influenced by Eastern traditions here, but they're kind of missing some pretty critical key points, I would say, from a Buddhist perspective. I'm not an expert on any of those guys, but I've read them all, and I'm just not. I think their work is fascinating, but it's just like, well, not to be a stickler, but I'm going to be a stickler because I'm Buddhist, and I put fine points on things, man, because they have fine points. Because things have fine points. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean other people can't see them. So you become something else. So you can start to see, right? You can kind of start to see that this psychology of becoming can create suffering in the mind. Right? Just kind of recognizing, right? We don't have to alienate ourselves so much from the idea of suffering, like it's a bad word. I mean, living that way is absurd because you're basically saying no to life. Well, I just can't see how you're going to break free from suffering through that lens. I just can't, My opinion there. Okay. If, as often happens, you have several competing desires at any one time, they will cause you to straddle competing inner worlds and competing senses of who you are. This is why you can feel divided against yourself and unsure of your place in the world, and is one of the most common ways in which becoming entails suffering. Oh, please hear that. Please, on your own, just read that like 8 or 9 or 10 or 40 times. And let it just kind of seep in there, right? This is why you can feel divided against yourself and unsure of your place in the world, and is one of the most common ways in which becoming entails suffering. But even when a desire is satisfied, it depends on worlds and identities that are fabricated out of precarious acts of clinging. And so those worlds and identities are precarious and bound to end. So can you see the truth in that? Can you see the truth in that? The logic in that? The logic that's there. This is why all becomings entail suffering and stress. If the fabrication of those worlds requires unskillful karma, that adds another level of suffering on top of the simple stress of trying to find happiness in the process of fabrication and the fabricated things that result. And so this speaks a lot to a decision that I made, and it actually didn't happen this morning. I have a really bad habit. Let me start with that. And these scenarios keep arising in my life, and I think it's great because it's kind of continually showing me my bad habit, right? Because I train on the mat so that I can train off the mat. And so what do I mean by that? in training on the mat, I'm able to work with, right effort, right concentration, right mindfulness enough to be able to kind of observe my own patterns and my own behaviors, right? And again, that comes from a lot of practice, right? Not just like, it didn't happen like in a week of meditating for 5 minutes a day, right? So again, not everybody's gonna like to hear that, but that's kind of how it is. So starting to work with noticing what is going on there, right? And you start to become aware of your part in the dance, your egoic part in the dance. Just because I practice doesn't mean I don't have an ego. I have it. My God, of course I have an ego. What I can do is I can just kind of practice to kind of remember that I'm an idiot, because I am an idiot. Sometimes I do great things. Sometimes I act like an idiot. Sometimes I owe people an apology. Sometimes I apologize when I shouldn't, and then I owe myself an apology, right? So there's a lot going on here. But I have a really bad habit of staying in places that no longer serve me. Now notice how I worded that. I didn't say I stay in places that I don't like, or that I stay in places where I don't like the people, or I stay in places that I don't agree with them because they're wrong. I didn't say any of that, because none of that is true. I leave lots of places where I really genuinely deeply respect the people, care about the people. This is very Buddhist, what I'm saying here. This is very Buddhist. It's something that the West doesn't like about Buddhism. And I will continue to not let the West dilute it because they're uncomfortable with it. I will continue to stand up against that. Yeah, to keep this pure for those who are interested in what the Pāli Canon actually had to say. But hear what he's saying here. If this is true, then wouldn't you say it's really, really important to protect your space and to be very, very disciplined and very, very, there's this word again, discerning about the people in your life, the places where you go, what you watch, what you eat, what you listen to, what you say, and what you do, if this is true? Wouldn't you? Hear what he's saying here. Do you hear how he's saying that on this level, you have no willpower? And I would imagine that this is probably what Western scientists mean by humans have no willpower. And the Buddha doesn't disagree with that in this regard. We are the sum accumulation of our past conditioning, our fabricated conditioning. And most people don't train, right? So most people they don't even realize that they're behaving the way they're behaving, they're doing what they're doing. And they may be really unhappy and not realize that what they're feeding, their experience, is just contributing to their own suffering. So again, this is a hard pill to swallow, right? Because again, we're not all well resourced to have control over what's in our environment. And I feel lucky every single day of my life that I live in the United States, because as a woman, there are some places in this world where I have absolutely zero control over my discernment. And what I would just say to those people is, here's where Buddhism can really serve you. If you're in a situation where you've got someone trying to control you, a partner or a parent, and you're relying on them, you truly do need to rely on them for your survival or your fear for your life, for your children's lives, or whatever your conditions are that might give rise here to why you can't leave. All of that may be true, in which case, what would a Buddhist path be in that situation? Well, a Buddhist path in that situation would be, can you practice Buddhism while you're in it, while you're taking action steps, if you think it's wise, using your own discernment, not the discernment of others, to get out of that situation. That would be what Buddhism would advise. Why? Again, read what he just said here. Because they're affecting you, because all of that is keeping you down. It's contributing to where you are. It's all part of that. And so again, here's where, this is why I don't have comments, right? Because I could see how so many people would write in and say, but I can't, I can't do this, and I can't. I hear ya, I mean, I did something crazy when I was 8, right out of high school, I joined the army. That's what I did. Be thy own master. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. Moving on. The process of replacing one becoming with another can continue without end, which is how small-scale becoming can carry on repeatedly. Yeah, well, we've already kind of talked about this, right? Let's just say a fabricated process in motion stays in motion, right? Until something disrupts it. And so when you act on the desires that shape small-scale becomings, you shape large-scale becomings, both in this lifetime and in future lifetimes. Well, that adds some saliency to it, doesn't it? There's that trick of believing in karma again, right? It's like, oh crap, I'd like to break the chain in this lifetime. Even if I don't necessarily believe in this stuff, if they're right, why not? Why not believe in it, right? Again, these are the games that I play with myself. Okay, this is how the process of rebirth after the death of the body is directed by events in the mind, and, like becomings in the mind, has the potential to continue indefinitely. And so finally, right, he's got this third one here. This third one. The third type of craving or thirst, non-becoming. Vibhava, and I'm sorry if I got that wrong, means the destruction of a particular process of becoming. The fact that craving for non-becoming could actually lead to becoming is counterintuitive. But the Buddha cited insight into this fact as one of the more subtle aspects of his awakening, and this comes from SS 127 and 128. The suttas don't explain the dynamic here, but apparently when the mind takes on the desire to end a particular type of becoming, either on the large scale, in a desire to end a relationship, or to commit suicide, or on the small scale, in a desire to end the imaginings around a particular desire, it takes on a new identity as a destroyer, and that becomes its new becoming. Oh, wow, this really is the super science of Buddhism right here. And this is where you see the law of attraction, you see where it got a lot of its source from Eastern traditions here. Some of the ideas that you hear, I'm not, I don't practice that, but I know it's popular in the West. And so I try to find different touch points, to kind of, for people that may not be familiar with the traditional Buddhist teaching, and kind of where maybe it has, I can see how it's influenced newer lineages or practices. So this idea that this is so heavy duty here, and it's such good stuff. I just want to focus on this last little section here, this last little sentence about the destroyer. Okay, so I'm just gonna sit with this for a second. I've never heard this word destroyer used in this context before, and I find it really exciting, because that is kind of what it feels like in the body. It is very hard for me to find words for this. I think I have a good analogy, maybe, and I'm going to bring it back to addiction recovery again, because I think that might be a really great entry point, at least for me, to be able to understand myself, so that I can, maybe provide some kind of reasonably, intelligent interpretation of what's being said here. Going back to what I just said earlier, right? So let's take someone who, let's say I used to be a smoker, okay? And yeah, back when I was in film school, we were all just a bunch of we were just chain smokers, man. We would just sit around and just you finish that one, right on, use that one to light the next one. You know what I'm saying? So we were really big chain smokers, and I was a really, really, really big chain smoker. There came a certain point in my life where I wanted to quit smoking, and I just wasn't able to do it. I just, I have a lot of predisposition to addiction. It's all over my family, on my father's side, and on my mother's side. There's a lot of mental illness. So I kind of have, right? I have that kind of preconditioning. There's that karma kind of piece of it, right? So there's that piece of it that I know about myself, right? That kind of knowledge about myself. but self-knowledge avails you nothing, right? So so how do I actually break the chain, right? Like I can't seem to get out of the loop. And so for me, there was a lot of things that had to happen to destroy the old me, the me that was Sarah who smokes. Sarah who is, because I had a lot of fabricated things that went along with my smoking. Like, first of all, that oral again, bulimia, right? There's something orally with me. I don't know what happened. Maybe I wasn't, who knows? I don't even care, right? I'm into strategy. So, there was that I had going on. There was also the wanting to fit in with my friends, right? That we would get together, we would go get scotch and have cigarettes and talk about the filmmakers that we loved and be snobs, right? So there was a social conditioning there. So I kind of had to kill all of that so that I could destroy the story called Sarah who smokes camels, right? And I had a story about camels too, right? Like that was the right cigarette to smoke because it had a better flavor. And right, so there's all kinds of stories that went along with my smoking. And so when I think about this idea of the destroyer here, right? That to me is what comes to mind. Today I had to walk away from something that I love the community and really appreciate the people, but it just it just does not align with the path that I've chosen for myself, and so I had to walk away. I had to kind of destroy the part of myself that was involved in that particular situation, so that I could be in more alignment with who I actually am. And again, it's not a rejecting, right? It's an aligning. Not a rejecting the other. It's an alignment. For you, you're choosing an alignment point. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. So AN 4:199, Sutta 126, lists 36 verbalizations to show how the mind expresses the processes of becoming and non-becoming to itself. All of these verbalizations center around I. What I am. How good or bad I am. What I might be. What I want to be, or how I might be turned into something else. And the things in the world outside that are the means by which any of these I's arise or change. The way these verbalizations are framed is important to know, because they show that to get beyond craving for becoming and non-becoming, the mind has to frame its verbalizations in other terms. This is precisely why transcendent right view cannot be expressed in terms of self and world if it is to do its work. Again, this is just a very critical aspect of Buddhism that doesn't really align with a lot of Western kind of view, and that's absolutely okay, but for instance, Carl Jung's fascination, right, with self-actualization. We're just not interested in Buddhism in the self, because there is no self. It's just kind of a non-starter. What's so great is, though, that you don't have to think I'm right, because I'm not right. Right? Right? As my friend Steve would say. Okay, I'm going to move on. The fact that craving for non-becoming creates further becoming presents a challenge on the path to the end of suffering. The desire to end becoming can be helpful in motivating you to embark on the path, but it will have to be abandoned if the path is to succeed. The Buddhist solution to this challenge is strategic, advocating skillful states of becoming in the mind, i.e. the 4 jhanas of right concentration that function in 3 ways to put the mind in a position to get past both becoming and non-becoming. These states of concentration, 1, provide a steady platform from which to observe the processes of becoming and non-becoming. 2, give hands-on experience in the causal processes by which states of becoming are created and destroyed. And 3, foster both the tranquility and the insight and discernment that allow the processes of becoming to run out on their own. And that's from Sutta 129. Because concentration is a form of becoming, and because insight and discernment are fabricated, the last step of the path requires that they run out on their own as well. This is why the path is like a raft that has to be abandoned on reaching the further shore really interesting. And actually, I'm going to stop it here because we'll begin the next episode at the bottom of page 130 and beginning with the third noble truth. But just to kind of end this little passage here, I've actually had some fun conversations in the Discord server about this, where people will kind of use this to kind of suggest that that they're at a place where they can just abandon the raft. And yeah, maybe you are, man. I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, I absolutely am a work in progress. I will continue to meditate. I will continue to meditate every day. I will continue to follow the Eightfold Path, and I will continue to not meditate on the I that I don't believe in. If you're listening to this, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. It's kind of garbage, really. The book isn't garbage, but really it's just me kind of just going off on my babblings about what I think this means, what I've been taught that it means, and why it's meaningful to me. So it means a lot to me that you care what I have to say. So thank you. I appreciate you. And take good care of yourself. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Bye.